November 20th, 2017, will please come to order and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Here. Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Mr. Hairston. Mr. Hairston is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Sharon.
Here.
Ms. Brown. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Next item is public comment related to the agenda. Do we have any requests?
No one has signed in.
Okay, thank you very much. And next is approval of the minutes from the October 2nd, 2017 meeting. Those minutes are in your packet. Do we have a motion relative to those minutes?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. It sounded like Shran first and Ms. Brown second.
Oh, no, she was first.
Oh.
I definitely heard her voice first.
Okay, so it's Ms. Brown first and Shran second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Ayes have it, and the minutes from October 2nd are approved. We have one resolution, and that's under number 5, Resolution 2017-0213.
Resolution number 2017-0213, making awards on requisition 40947 to various providers in the amount not to exceed $4,542,350 for IT hardware, software, and other peripheral items for the period 12/1/2017 through November 30th, 2020.
Thank you very much, and I understand that we use the reverse auction procurement on this item, and so I'd like if in the presentation you could not only explain what we're proposing to purchase through this contract, but also explain the procurement process and how it worked.
Emily McNeely, Department of IT, and Michael Young here as well. So in the fall, we released an RFP for IT hardware, software, and other peripheral items to establish essentially a price list to purchase IT hardware and software for the next 3 years. So the items will allow the county to replace legacy infrastructure and introduce new technologies to infuse performance efficiencies in our infrastructure environment, including but not limited to voice, wireless, storage, virtual, and backup environments. The county utilized a reverse auction process for the pricing component of the RFP. So essentially, we released an RFP in accordance with our normal processes and procedures, except as part of the proposals, they were asked not to submit pricing. The pricing component was captured through the reverse auction process. And I'll go into a little bit more details on how that went. So we spent months identifying items that the county would need in the next 3 years based on previous spend trends and future projects. So essentially looking at our 18-19 budget for what was coming up, in addition to the stuff in 17 that we were in the process of procuring. We put a couple of projects on hold in terms of procurement to utilize the reverse auction for them. So in some instances, we had some pretty aggressive pricing already based on our normal negotiations, and so we use those prices as our benchmarks in the reverse auction. If we didn't have pricing, either because we historically hadn't bought the item before or we hadn't engaged a vendor, we used GSA pricing as our benchmark. So essentially for every item, and there were about 29 categories of items that we put out in the RFP, we ended up with 5 respondents, and those 5 respondents responded to 10 of the 29 categories. So the way the reverse auction essentially, sorry to take a step back, so we got in 5 proposals. As a team, we scored those proposals based on our normal categories of project management, vendor qualifications, staff qualifications, understanding of what we were looking to do, and then some different categories had specific certifications and requirements that vendors have to meet. So, for example, our Cisco items, the vendors have to meet.
They have to be a Gold or Premier partner, and they have to procure their items through normal Cisco channels and not through backdoor channels, which is referred to as gray market.
So essentially, we went through and vetted all the vendors to make sure that they met the quality standards that we have for our vendors. And then based on those scores, the vendors who had qualified scores were asked to participate in the reverse auction event. So the way the reverse auction event works was we ran each lot, so the 10 lots were each run separately at different times, and the vendors were trained on the platform, and we started the event, I believe, at 8:30 in the morning, and they ran, I think we actually finished up pretty quickly based on the timing in different lots, but all of the pricing was in by 4 o'clock that day, and so we had some big activity on the Cisco lot, the HPE lot, and then the NetApp lot. The remaining 7 were best and final offers, where we didn't have as much competition between the vendors because we only had 5 respondents come in, and so we asked the vendors, essentially, we sent a reserve, so our benchmarks were the ceiling price that we wouldn't award higher than, and we were essentially looking to save at least 5% in each category, and so that was the reserve that we set for each, and then the vendors essentially came in and gave us pricing on those items. As part of that, each lot, so for the Cisco, the HP, and the NetApp that had multiple vendors in there participating and bidding on, we opted to award those lots to a single vendor. You could award based on line item just to get the best price. We opted based on the projects that we're doing to stick with one vendor for those 3 specific areas. And so the line by line pricing for all the items kind of comes in a little bit differently. So for the Fluke, it was a 7% savings. Our Eaton UPS batteries are at 21% savings. Veritas came in at 10% savings. HP ranges from 2 to 29% depending on the line item. Fujitsu, our scanners, came in at 23%. Apple products ranged from 2 to 27%. Telestream was 10 to 11%. NetApp ranged from 2 to 17%. HPE ranged from 1 to 10%, and then Cisco ranged from 10 to 29%. And so these ranges are in addition to some discounts that we had already negotiated, and I'll let Mike touch a little bit on the Cisco discounts and how they work.
Yeah, so for example, what Emily was referring to was the discount on top of the discount that we already received. So from off of list, a good Cisco discount is anywhere from 30 to 40%. As a result of this process, all the Cisco equipment came in averaging between 53 and 59% off of their list price. So we're very pleased in the process in and of itself. Some of the items that Emily had already referred to where they were already aggressively negotiated because we had put a pause on those projects, we put those prices in as our baseline. And because of the process, even those that were coming in as best as final, they still came in another 5% underneath what we had already negotiated. So from a methodology perspective, we were very pleased at the overall outcome at everything and how the prices just kept dropping down. So some of the projects, especially in 17, that we're going to be working on because that we put on hold for this, one of them is our backup environment. Our backup environment was set to be replaced. It's outdated, and with the volumes of data, and we all know in this world, it's just more and more data. We have to get a significant uplift in our backup environment. So we were scheduled to do that replacement anyway. So we were able to drive the discounts with there. Our security environment from an email perspective, with all the attacks and the way that area has grown, targeted attacks have grown 900% against the county since 2014. What a targeted attack is an attack on a specific email address. So, for example, Councilman Perkins, boom, it would go after you. That is a targeted attack. So that activity has gone up 400%. 900% since 2014. Every day we block 40,000 malicious attacks against our email system. So we are upgrading and advancing the technology in what we refer to as our Barracuda technology, and we're going to be replacing that in the fall and in January once this goes through. Virtual desktop is another technology that we're bringing in primarily in this particular case for our West Shore training facility. What this is going to be, it introduces a virtual desktop instead of a physical desktop. So to kind of put it in perspective, in West Shore, it's going to be a shared county asset. So we're going to have state training going on there, and at the same time, county training going on in there. In the traditional method, if you had 40 desktops in a training facility and you had a platform in there from JFS, you wouldn't be able to schedule the county on the same day or the next couple of days because we'd have to re-image all of those desktops to put a county platform on top of that. With this technology, what we'll be doing, it's really just the flip of a switch. You go away for lunch, come back, and now I can either do county or state during the same business day, which is pretty significant for the way that facility is going to grow out. Our wireless technology, our core infrastructure for our wireless environment is roughly 7 years old. That's going to be getting uplifted, and it's a 3-year project to do the facelift. We're starting with getting the core done, as well as introducing a true guest network to all the county buildings, not just here, but the various different HHS facilities out at the kennel, where our clients can come in and actually get into the guest network and get access to the services. Will also include the jurors over at the courts, and we expect that project to be done in the February-March timeframe. And then back on our voice environment, we are doing an upgrade on our existing infrastructure to version 11. We have 452 phones that are at end of life that are not supported in that new release. So we have to replace those 452 phones in order to upgrade the software on our voice infrastructure. So those are just some of the highlights of some of the larger projects that we're doing this fall as a result of this.
So the total savings will vary depending on what our needs are over the next 3 years. As I mentioned, the line-by-line discounts differ, so it kind of depends which items we actually put orders in for what the total savings on the contract will be. For the 2017 spend that we're looking to do, it will be about a 36% savings off of the proposed about $1 million that we are looking to do this year that captures the projects that Mike just talked about. $200,000 of that will be paid out of HHS, and $873,405 will be paid out of the general fund. Questions?
Councilman Tron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where are the vendors located physically? Where are their offices?
So they kind of range. TEC is local and in Rocky River. Where's Rolta?
I honestly don't know where they're based at. They're a worldwide company.
Telestream is also out of state. MNJ, I believe, they have local offices.
They have local offices.
They have local offices, but are based out of state. And then who did I miss? Logicalis. They also have local.
They have local offices, but they're based out of Michigan.
Did we give a preference to, based on our county legislation that says we give a preference to local contractors?
Yes.
So the differential, even if there was a difference, did the reverse auction allow for the local supplier to come down those 2 points, 2%?
It did. Yep.
And
Yeah,
did
TEC was one of our largest lots was Cisco, and TEC, which is not only local but women-owned, minority-owned, and she won the entire Cisco lot.
Okay, and provided training that will be coming along with any of these purchases? Is there going to be training from the vendors, the local? These are all distributors, more than likely. These are all local distributors. None of them are which are involved in the actual manufacturing of these products. So they're.
Yeah, we have a relationship with our HP vendor, for example, for a couple of things that we're going to be dealing with, and the reseller for that is Advisix. We'll be getting training from them for any of the technologies that we're going to be bringing in. Barracuda is another one. That one doesn't require on-site training, but we've had relationships with them before, and it's the training that we get with them is all virtual, and it's included.
So the competitive folks who are participating in the reverse auction, how did we compare the training quality from one vendor to the next?
For most of them, we've had prior experience with them.
Okay, so.
But it wasn't a decision point in the technologies. Only a few of the technologies require any training at all, Barracuda being one of them, and we've had a past relationship with Barracuda. And so the reseller, which is M&J, who is reselling, would be dealing directly with the manufacturer being Barracuda, not through the reseller.
For the, those firms that lost the bid, is there a proposed after-action survey to see how they were impacted by the bidding process, liked, disliked, things of that nature?
Yep, our business services manager will be conducting a survey of all vendors to see how the process went and how we can improve it.
I'd like to see that, the post, I don't need to see it by name, I just like to see the survey, because my concern is whether or not we will see some loss of vendors in future contract bidding at some point. Sometimes that happens with these reverse auctions that people say, geez, that was bloody, and I don't even want to be, I don't want to participate, because we appreciate the fact you're getting a reduction in the bid, but they're also all watching or have the access to all this public information, and all of which it sounds like some of these contracts are already ready to go at pretty attractive pricing, and then we got an extra 5% out of them. Yeah, that sounds good. But if the next time around we have only 2 people participating, that's my concern about these reverse auctions.
The other option that we have, if I can add to this, we are not locked into that. If we look at a particular technology and we think we could still get better pricing outside the reverse auction process, we'll take that method.
Okay. My real concern is when we go live with the ERP system, because a lot of these pieces of equipment, and you were talking about all the hits and all the attacks out there, we're pushing all of our employees through ransomware training, we're pushing them through scenario training, we're pushing them through simulation training. Are we doing all those things with this? Because when we flip that switch on the new ERP system, we're gonna have a bunch of people doing new things that they didn't even know, and the bad guys are probably licking their chops to find that as an open, vulnerable spot.
Yeah, we are currently architecting an awareness campaign. We are already doing some of that behind the scenes with a product called Nobi 2. Some of you may have been hit with that with the RNC when we put out a spoof to get an idea, to raise awareness, but then that takes them to an educational site and walks through, these are the things to look for. And we do that with every attack against the county. We'll send out information. Here's what you missed. Here's what this looked like. This is why this is identified as ransomware or it's some kind of an attack that's coming in.
So we piloted that training program in IT this past fall and are getting ready to roll out the full training program to the entire county.
Well, I know that one of the things that I've asked our staff to see what they could get was our ability to upgrade software, passwords and things of that nature, and we're still not allowed to do that. We have to go back through somebody on probably your side of the aisle to get the door opened. And as we know, as we go down this list, one of the key things is complicated passwords and changing them often, and we're not able to do those things out there.
In your particular case, you have to be inside the network, which
Right.
is a security requirement.
But there's plenty of devices that you should be able to get into the network and allow you to change on a remote basis. I would hope at some point along the way. Because I don't know about everybody else, but I'm sure a lot of us we're getting our county email on this, or we're getting it on our iPhone, or we're getting it multiple different ways, and those devices should be able to allow us to get access to stay current on the kind of stuff. Thank you.
Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you just reiterate how you set the benchmarks for the pricing?
For the pricing, yeah. So if we had known historical pricing, we used what the last price that we paid for that item was. If we were in the midst of working on that project and had fresh pricing for it, we used that as our benchmark of, had we not done the auction, this is how much we think we would have spent. And if we didn't have pricing available, we used GSA, which is the General Services Administration, which is a cooperative purchasing run by the federal government that essentially has a really neat website that you can go and essentially search for any item, and it'll tell you the 10 vendors that sell it to you and the price that they'll sell it to you at. And so we took the lowest price that was available that the federal government has.
Okay, thank you. And so with that method, if something came in higher, we would still be privy to the original benchmark price?
So we wouldn't. So we have the option to not purchase through this vehicle on that, or as part of contract negotiations, continue to negotiate that price down.
Okay, so is it a blind bid? Because if I understand, you had contracts in place, so these people really don't know that who they're bidding for, essentially.
Correct. They don't know who they're bidding against. They know how many people they're bidding against. So in some lots, there were 3 vendors, so they could see where they ranked amongst the 3 vendors that were bidding, but they didn't know who the other 2 vendors were.
And with that, they didn't know exactly the organization they were bidding. The 3 vendors were bidding against. I'm guessing if they knew that they were bidding for something they already reduced 5%, they wouldn't enter the market.
So they're really going based off their margins and what they have approval for and wiggle room from a pricing perspective. But yeah, there's the potential that some vendors didn't participate because another vendor already holds the county contract and they didn't want to steal their business.
So I'll just be real clear. Did they know they were bidding for county contracts?
Yes.
Okay. Now there were 10 out of 29 categories you said, so would we say that's a little bit better than a 30% success rate, or how would you categorize that?
So we were hopeful that more of the lots would have been bid on. Some of the feedback that we got from the vendors was just the time frame of the 3 weeks and a day posting was too short for their legal reviews of RFP processes. So we kind of knew that going into it, and so our plan was for the lots that we did get responses on, we would run the auction on those and award the contract off of, and then if they're based on our needs, we would put out another RFP for those items.
And I understand TEC, you said it was minority and women-owned business that won the Cisco lot.
I believe they're just women-owned. I don't know that they're minority-owned.
Okay. Were they a new contract?
We've done business with them in the past.
Okay. So what happened with the remaining 19 categories? How will those be?
So essentially, as the needs come up for the IT department and the county as a whole, if there are, so we essentially cast a really wide net for all of the stuff that we think we're going to need. Some of it was just, we'll throw it in, and if we need it in the next 3 years, we have a procurement method for it. It was competitively bid, great. But we didn't really have a plan, an immediate need for it. So where we didn't get bids on things that we do have an immediate need for, we'll be putting out another RFP for those.
Another RFP. And I guess I have a lot of questions, I'm sorry. So with the 5 respondents, you said they responded to 10 of the 29 categories. Is that because the 10 were already pre-lotted, if you will? How did all 5 respond to the same 10, or did we?
No, there was a mix of different ones. So MNJ responded to the most categories. TEC only responded to Cisco. So some categories had 3 vendors that responded. Others just had 1, maybe 2. And so part of it is also us trying to cast a wider net to get more vendors aware of our contracts or RFPs that are out there and get them responding to them. But we would have liked to see a bit more respondents for this proposal.
Okay, and do we use the same tool to notify companies as we would with an RFP, or is this just a different type of setup?
It's the same. We have our plan holders list that had about 120 vendors on it for them to get notified, and some of the feedback was the short time period. And we were, from a budget perspective, looking to get this done in 2017.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What was the reason for using the method of contracting this time, the reverse auction?
The reverse auction. So Mike had done some research over the past few years.
Well, yeah, this is our second pass through it. So we went down this path back in 2013. Then I revisited it again at the end of 2016. And we sat down and I saw an auction with the state of New York. And for just basic items, whether it be food, office supplies, or technology. It didn't matter what it was. When you get two people competing against each other, you get a true definition of what their margin really is. I saw a $68 million PC purchase go down to 26. Office supplies went from 600K down to 300K. You know, when you get them into a competitive mode, it's not a one-time shot and you're done. You know, okay, I didn't win this time for this bill, I'm gonna knock my price down a penny, or I'm gonna knock it down $1. And so for the same technology, you're just gonna see their price point continually drop down. So when you look at that, and you just think of it in terms of if I were to put this into the price, the reverse auction into the pricing component of an RFP, you could still go through all your qualifications, but then let them go after each other to drive the price down even more. So it's really a nothing to lose, very much to gain. And because this is going to be a process improvement cycle, we're going to learn from this. We're going to get better on the next time. When they did it for food, they were very successful. When I was watching that particular auction, they were getting 20% on many of the items when a typical discount was only 10. And for the items that were either no bid or the auction price was higher than what we would typically do, we went with what we would typically do. So we're very conscious to Councilman's point about making sure we maintain those vendor relationships. So we were in constant contact with them through the process. We got feedback. We're going to go back again with a survey to get even more feedback so that we make sure that we improve the process going forward. But regardless, whether it be technology, office supplies, food, whatever the item is, if it's competitively bid and you still have vendor qualifications to make sure you're getting the right vendor, what you're doing now, instead of getting one shot at the price, you're pretty much guaranteed to get that rock bottom price.
Is this our first time doing this for an IT
Yeah.
contract? Okay. Just in my experience over the last few years, seeing these IT dollar amounts, they certainly, not only can the product sometimes go over your head, the dollar amount appears to have done the same. So it seems like a creative way to attack it. I've heard, but take a moment and just explain to me again just the mechanics of a reverse auction. What is it actually? What are you doing? What did you do?
So if you bought something on eBay,
Okay.
okay, so think about eBay, but it's essentially the opposite scenario. So we pre-qualify our vendors and everyone's set up. They're in this online platform, and there's a list of items that we want to buy, and you want to sell me. And so if I have Councilman Miller, Councilman Purnell Jones, and Councilwoman Brown all in there as my 3 vendors, you guys are all in there in this portal, and you see all the line items, and you can see my benchmark price, and you can see the price that you essentially have as your starting bid. So the same as eBay, you put in your starting bid, and then once that auction starts, it tells you where you're at. So it'll tell you your rank if you're in first, second, and third. And then you can put in another bid. And so every time you put in a bid, it resets the clock. So if we set the auction to be 15 minutes, everyone's got 15 minutes to do this. Once you get down to that 3-minute mark, every time you place a bid, that clock restarts to 3 minutes. So that you're continuing the process and elongating it to give you time, so that, you know, you started in second place, now you're in first, but now Councilwoman Brown wants to place a bid, so then it gives you another 3 minutes. And so it kind of gives you that time to figure out what's the price, can I beat it, where am I at, what's my margin look like, you know, is it really worth it to me? And so it, you know, all 3 vendors see where they're at and where they're ranked, and they see where they're ranked from an individual line item and then the total across the lot. So you could be, you know, on one item and not another, but where you are kind of varies.
So it's exactly like eBay.
Just the opposite. The price is going down instead of going up.
With one slight differential. If a vendor goes quiet for any long period of time and they were active, the vendor will call them.
Only if they get disconnected.
Well,
So if
they know
there
that.
is, you know, if they get disconnected, because we like to make sure that technology doesn't fail us, and we're making sure the vendors have all the opportunities, they can essentially see when they've disconnected from the platform. So if they just, you know, gave up and said, I'm done, and signed out, that's fine, but we like to make sure. And so we'll pause the auction, you know, you reach out to the vendor and say, are you having technical difficulties? And if they are, we pause it and wait, so that, you know, just because you lost your internet connection doesn't mean you shouldn't get to bid.
Does this actually maybe give an inherent advantage to larger companies with a a greater room for profit margin, like a Walmart, they can sell things for less?
No, look at the Cisco lot as an example, which TEC, which by far was the smallest company out of anybody that was participating. And they took home all the Cisco.
So you're saying smaller companies actually can bid on this as well and
Oh, yeah.
have an equal advantage to a larger company when, how many bids did you receive?
5.
5?
Yeah, and TEC is a good example.
Small, large,
where-
mixture in those
Yeah, it is
5?
a mix. TEC, their niche is Cisco. While they could have bid and we have purchased other technologies through them in the past, in this particular case, they were just focusing only on the Cisco gear. Advisix, same as they, but they focused on the HP lot very specifically because that's where their niche is. And they didn't want to muddy the waters, so their focus was on those particular technologies.
And you mentioned a smaller company did receive you said it was not a minority company, but it was a,
It was I misspoke. They're small and they're women-based. They're based out of Rocky River. And they brought home all the
Women-owned.
Cisco gear.
okay. All right, thank you.
So essentially, you had a two-step process. You had a qualification stage and then a reverse auction stage. How many bidders came in at the very start of the process and sought to be qualified?
All 5 ended up being qualified.
So you don't, and if you'd have put this out for RFP, how many bids would you typically get on this stuff? I gotta think there's many more vendors than this that could have bid on this stuff. Am I right or no?
It's true, from the feedback that we got from the vendors that didn't respond, it wasn't based on the auction, and it was just more based on the time period to review and some of the requirements that we put in the RFP in terms of, we had pretty strict requirements for how long they had to hold pricing for us, that not all companies want to hold pricing for 3 to 5 years. And so we kind of are doing a lessons learned on that. I think that was probably more of where we had some issues getting some vendors in terms of how strictly we wrote some of the requirements for this, and less on the reverse auction side of things.
And did I hear you correctly that only on 3 items out of the 10 did you get multiple bids?
That is correct.
So out of the original 29, you only got multiple bids on about 10% of them. Do you have an estimate on what the total cost savings will be from using the reverse auction process on this particular contract?
I would say at least, I can tell you, so I can run the numbers a little bit better for some of the HHS needs in terms of the next 3 years, because they're pretty standard for the next 3 years. So on the $200,000 for HHS, it's between 13 and 16% that we'll save each year as a result. On the IT side, it's a little bit more complicated to go through the line by lines on these bigger projects to know the exact savings for those.
But for the initiatives that we've slated for this fall, it's $500,000. It's $498,000 is what we'll say.
And 17.
For which ones?
Just for the items that I laid out that we're going to try to accomplish this fall, it's $498,000 is what we'll say.
That's from the list price.
It's a mixture, so it's GSA or our previously negotiated benchmarks that we used. So there's a mixture of benchmarks depending on what pricing we had. So for some items, we didn't have pricing, so we used the GSA benchmark. For others, we had already had either quotes in or historical pricing that we used as our benchmarks.
But you probably could have obtained some of these savings by using regular RFPs.
I don't think we would have gotten we would not have gotten mid 50% discounts on the Cisco gear. Typically, it's like I said, it's between 35, 40. If we're lucky, we'll get 45. But because they were going against each other, that line item kept going down. And to get 53 in the best case we got was 59 off of certain items I've never seen that before.
And I know the advantage of considering some of these items as a single contract, but how much less would the pricing have been if we had gone line by line rather than category by category?
Some of the items that we really can't because they're kind of like a package. For example, the backup environment, it's a series of line item of components, but we have to purchase them as a single entity.
Okay. You talked about these malicious attacks, for 40,000 of them in a year,
A day.
a day, 40,000 in a day. What are all these folks trying to accomplish with these attacks? What would they do if the attack got through and wasn't blocked?
Probably one of the recent notable was like Licking County. It shut down their entire environment.
And for what purpose?
It's just, some of it's malicious, some of it is, you would call it piracy, where they want you to go and get that key to unlock you, write me a check.
So they're trying to get access to information, or
It varies. You have the hijackers that just want to lock your PC and you have to write them a check in order to free your PC. Sometimes they just want your email addresses so they can sell them overseas. Often they want to get in to see if they can hack in and get into some of our private information, right? Where in our HR or Health and Human Services, where we may have PII information, your social security number or something like that.
Ms. Brown?
You talked about the price hold for 3 to 5 years, and I'm kind of glad to hear that because I was wondering if there's any potential for change orders or price increases. So it sounds like you took care of that on the front end.
We did. So originally in the RFP, we asked for a 5-year hold for pricing. We ended up doing a 3-year contract for this, given how much we thought we could project based on budget and our needs for the next 3 years and how technology changes. So we opted to do a 3-year contract with options to renew. So essentially, it's still a 5-year price hold. We just have to exercise that option after the 3 years.
So what are the payment terms? Are we paying for this upfront or as we purchase or after invoice?
After invoice.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we envisioned we were going to have 26 categories,
There were originally 29.
or 29?
I
I meant
identified.
29, we got 20, we only had 3 that actually participated in this bidding process.
So they all participated in the bidding process. So they still submitted bids that came in under our benchmarks as part of the process. It was just the live auction event versus a best and final offer.
Okay, but
We actually had 10 that we had responses to. 3 had multiple responses, and 7 of them had single responses that were acceptable.
right, so the 3 categories out of the 29 where we actually had multiple, what I would consider to be competitive, because a single bid is not a competitive, there's nobody that you're competing with in a single bid. So we're down to 10% participation in competitive process. Is that a correct statement? 3 out of the 29?
Well, something that Emily had already touched on, even though it may have not have gone through the competitive auction, if we came in with a baseline and that baseline was already a discounted number and they came in under that, that's something that this process introduces that a traditional RFP wouldn't. because
Excuse
they
me.
wouldn't have that baseline.
Excuse
price
me,
to go
Mr. Young, can you speak into the microphone, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. You want me to repeat it? Okay.
Well, I guess a 10% where you got multiple bidders wouldn't, to me, strike me as being an ultra successful program, even though you have a number, because you were hoping certainly to get a higher number of people. I would have thought that we're going to be competing in a multiple bid process.
Correct, but the theory in doing the 29 lots was just to put out as much as we could to see what was there. And we got, on the main needs that we had, those are the categories that we did get responses back on. So none of the projects that we were holding up or tying up resources with during the last quarter of what we knew that we had a need for were in the items that weren't responded to.
But you would have gladly have taken competitive bidding in the other 26 categories.
Correct. It
If
was
they would have
more of,
participated.
yeah, it was more of, here's all the things under the sun. Essentially, I sent multiple emails out to the entire department. If you could buy stuff today, what would you buy and what would it look like? And we put all of that in a list so that we could put it out as one competitive process. But there was no intention that we would ever get back all 29
No,
categories.
I understand. What would have been, what was, when you did your plotting of a forecasted model here, how many were you anticipating getting? Has to be more than 3 categories. What was your category number that you were hoping to get competitive bidding on?
So I was hoping for about half that we would
So that would have
have.
been 15 roughly. And so we fell significantly short. We fell 80% short then out of that.
And for me, I think it's a lot of the sourcing and making sure that the vendors are aware and, you know, improving our relationships with vendors.
You're getting the rest of my questions, yeah. You know where this is going. How many do you think did not participate of those 15 you were hoping for, of the 12 that didn't participate in a competitive process? How many do you think stayed off the field because this is not something they want to be in?
So that's part of the survey initiative that we're looking into doing. It's not just the vendors that did participate, but those that didn't respond and why they didn't, and trying to get to that of, you know, did they just not know about it? Was it the time restriction? You know, what was the reason? Is it the competitive reverse auction process that they don't want to do business in? To try and get to that so that we can learn from this.
And I only raise that because Ford Motor Company tried to do this, and they did it for a while and found out that it was a disaster, and their vendors pulled out ultimately because they had the same kind of lack of participation. And so what ended up happening, you ended up paying more, even though you had the 3 that you got a competitive and got good pricing on, the other 12 on that you were hoping for, you didn't not necessarily get as good a pricing as you might have gotten had there been 2, 3, 4 people participating, and Ford ran into that problem when they tried this technique out there. And I'm not trying to say it won't work, not trying to suggest it, but it really, really needs to be monitored out there. Okay, let's say you have some that have been successful and they wanted them to have a 5-year hold. I assume that's a 5-year hold on pricing. Do they have an escalator clause in there that allows them to bump it based on some kind of inflation or cost of living increases and things of that nature in that 5-year?
We did allow vendors to take exception, and some took exception where the manufacturer's price increases by a certain amount, then, you know, that. So we did allow for them to take those exceptions.
So that was the only place, is the manufacturer passing along a cost increase on the piece of equipment, not their administrative costs or their labor or anything like that?
Vendors didn't submit that as an exception. It was only the manufacturer.
Okay. So now what we've done is we've got vendors that are, in theory, locked down for 3 years to 5 years. And we all know historically that some vendors aren't going to be there. They won't even be in business for 5 years. So what's our option now that we've got the lockdown price? Some of the other folks have maybe perhaps left the field because they don't like the way this whole thing went. What's our risk of locking in a price? Is the vendor on the hook of the original piece of equipment, the Cisco piece of equipment? They're not, are they?
They're not. It's just the vendor that we contracted
Well,
with.
just the distributor. We don't have a manufacturer. We only have the distributor that's in this place. I would think that some point along the way, in a 5-year agreement, that we're going to find some distributors are not still going to be in business out there. And I hope you've got a scenario based in how you keep our pricing. We don't get the illusion that today's pricing is going to will not have a hiccup between now and the end of all these categories. So, and over to Mr. Miller's question, do we have ransom insurance in place for that scenario that you were alluding to? Because that's ultimately what they did in the hospital, where they seized all the hospital records. They seized them and demanded a ransom payment.
Part of our risk management contracts, we have a cyber insurance clause in there.
That would include things of that nature?
Where they would have access or potential access to any of our data, it's a requirement that we have cyber insurance by the vendors.
Okay, but specific provisions like that, where we would have the ability to unlock our data, we've got that in there, in the cyber insurance, do you know? And maybe your answer is you don't want to make it public either.
Well, yeah, but
That's okay.
yeah, the cyber insurance has part of cyber insurance allows for us to file a claim with the insurance company to recoup any costs or penalties associated with any loss associated to a cyber attack of any kind.
Yes, when we go through our contract analysis for our vendors, where they have access to our data, we have cyber insurance as a requirement in our contracts now for those vendors.
Okay, and does it include, do you have any idea whether it includes the ability to make payments in Bitcoin? Because that's gonna be the hardest thing. That's actually, turns out if you're gonna end up having to pay. You can't even find Bitcoin very easily on the marketplace, but that's what the bad guys insist on.
Yeah, I could have risk management put together what the requirements surrounding the actual cyber insurance clause is.
I attended a class this week from Olmer and Byrne on this very subject matter, and I think it would be well worth sitting down. The FBI was there and helped conduct the class. So it is some of the stuff is just somebody wanting to do it because they're bad guys. The other is it's a business, and they've found out how to make a lot of money out of this. Thank you.
Out of the 10 items that we have executable bids on, are we planning to execute on all of them in the near term, or some of these ones where we're going to say, well, we don't need that item right now, but in case we do, we have a bid in place. Can you tell us how much of each of those we have?
Sure. So it's a master contract set up with the 5 vendors, so the money will get spread across based on our needs. And so the original items that we'll be purchasing in 2017 relate to Barracuda, the VDI that Mike mentioned, that's the HP line, the Cisco products, some HP laptops, some Fujitsu scanners, the Eaton UPS battery packs, and then some more Cisco for HHS are the 2017 items. And we had really focused on getting all those details together and ready for the next round of projects. And then in 2018, there will be more on the Cisco end, some more battery packs from Eaton, more PC technology, monitors, scanners, iPads, and HHS. As Mike said, continuing to build out that wireless network with HHS. 2019, it's a lot of the same. It's just figuring out what they all kind of look like, but they're all part of the same projects that are multi-year.
So out of the 10 items, does this include all 10 of the items, or are some of the items being held out for possible use later?
I believe that over the next 3 years, we will need all 10 products in some way.
All 10 items, okay. Are there other questions? Even though you got discounts, we're paying a lot of money for this stuff. And I see that your contract is scheduled to start on 12/1/17. So my question is whether you're looking for passage on second reading suspension, which would mean it could pass the council on November 28th.
We are.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
One question. When I chaired Public Works, we always saw, and still do in construction, an estimated cost. Because we know what an estimated cost should be for the construction project. And then they bid. Do you have that type of skill set, insight, knowledge as to what the estimate cost should be for what we're bidding out? And how close, if you have one, how close did this contract come to it?
For the 2017 stuff, we're all under that estimate. So, our those benchmarks, do form a lot of that and try and help us. We do use GSA to figure out, what the federal government has already negotiated with these vendors to get a starting point to see how well we're doing. And as we continue to go, since this is 3 years, next year, if I go to do something, I'm still going to be checking that quote and this pricing against that GSA rate. Because if GSA is cheaper than what we got from this, and it's a vendor that's qualified and meets our standards, we'll switch to that vendor, that this contract is not, there's no guarantee under the contract for us to buy any of these items. So I think that Mike and his team have done a really good job in figuring out those estimates and where we fall. And, normally we would have been around those, but the reverse auction process in this scenario drove deeper discounts.
Okay. But did you actually reach those estimated costs? So are you still above the estimated costs, or?
For 2017, we'll be at our estimated cost based on it kind of letting us buy more, and Mike's able to now do that wireless project a little bit faster because we saved more money, that he doesn't have to wait to buy some of these things.
So what you're saying is that if we can get a better deal down the line, we can do so.
Yeah.
But other than a few exceptions, the vendors are required to provide products at these prices.
Correct.
I can see why the vendors wouldn't really like this process. But nevertheless, I think that you have work to do on vendor relations, given the results that you got. But you obviously put a lot of time and effort into this, and you seem to have gotten very attractive prices for the county, which is a good thing, at least in the short run. So my question is whether somebody's ready to make a motion to move this to the full council on second reading suspension.
So move.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, it's been moved by Councilman Schron and seconded by Gallagher. Any further discussion? The motion is to refer Resolution 2017-0123 to the full council with recommendation to leadership to place it on the calendar for second reading suspension. All those in favor say aye. 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 Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the legislation will be referred.
Thank you
Thanks
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Okay. We have an item 6 on our agenda for discussion, but I'm not aware of any discussion. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Miscellaneous business is the same thing. Anyone signed in for public comment?
No, no one has signed in.
There being no further business before this committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.